Okay, I think I'm going to get started here. So I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar from the Capacity research team. And today we're very excited to have our partner organization, Vélo Canada Bikes, here to share pedal pole Sondo Vélo. So a little bit about CapaCITY. CapaCITY is an interdisciplinary research team, and our aim is to understand why and how cities implement sustainable transportation interventions, specifically all ages and abilities, bicycle networks, and speed management interventions. So our webinar series is designed to showcase research and practice that is of relevance to this aim. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with an emoji that describes how you're feeling today. And as I mentioned, today's session will be recorded. So I'd like to start by beginning with a land acknowledgement. I recognize that participants are joining from a variety of places, and ask that you each take a moment to acknowledge and reflect upon the history and relationships to the lands to which you are located. I personally acknowledge that and respect that I am on the Lekwungen people's unceded territory. And this is the home of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. So a little bit about me. My name is Karen Labrie, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the National Research Manager for the CapaCITY team. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this CapaCITY webinar on pedal pole Sondo Vélo. So we'll get started with the presentation after a few housekeeping notices. So before I introduce our presenters, and we're very lucky today, we have 3 rockstar presenters, a few pointers to help keep the webinar moving smoothly. As I mentioned, we're recording the webinar so we can share it after the event. The second, we'll have closed captions enabled for this presentation. And third, please mute your microphones throughout the presentation. Finally, we hope you will get a whole bunch of really interesting questions. So please post questions in the Q&A box for the speaker. And then myself and my colleague Aman Chandi will help facilitate that once the speakers are done, are finished speaking, so as not to distract them. So now on to the main event. So one of the barriers faced by advocates, planners, and researchers in their work to advance safe cycling infrastructure across Canada is a shortage of reliable data on where people are already traveling by bike. So to address these gaps, Vélo Canada Bikes, which is the national nonprofit organization that advocates for everyday cycling in Canada, partnered with researchers across the Canada to launch pedal pole or Sondo Vélo in 2021. And this is a community-driven event or effort to collect data on who is cycling and where in Canada. So today we have 3 presenters. We have Kate Walker, who is the chair of the board for Vélo Canada Bikes, and she is pursuing her PhD in population health at the University of Ottawa. Kate chaired the organizing committees for the first, second, and third National Bike Summits, which brought together politicians and cycling supporters to discuss how the federal government can help build a bicycle-friendly Canada. So with Kate's leadership, Vélo Canada Bikes successfully advocated for the federal government to adopt a national active transportation strategy for Canada and to commit $400 million for active transportation infrastructure across the country. Our second speaker will be Dr. Madeleine Bonsma-Fisher, who studies how safe cycling networks influence the equitability of destinations people can access by bicycle in Canada. She completed her master's and PhD in biophysics at the University of Toronto and holds a bachelor's degree in honors cooperative physics from the University of Waterloo. So you can find her riding around Toronto on her beloved cargo bike. And finally, Samuel Benoit. Samuel serves as the executive director for Vélo Canada Bikes, and he holds an undergraduate degree in environmental studies and geography, and Master of Social Entrepreneurship from the Holt International Business School. Samuel has done work to advance active transportation, sustainability, social enterprise, and education with nonprofits and social enterprises in 7 countries on 3 continents. Okay, so now on to the main event. So we will switch it over to Kate.
Thanks so much, Karen. I'm just going to get the presentation started here. Okay. So thank you to each of you for taking the time to join us here today. It's a great honor and an excitement to present some of our findings. So during today's presentation, I'll begin the presentation by briefly describing what Vélo Canada Bikes does. Then I'll describe what pedal pull Sondo Vélo is, why pedal pull was needed, and how pedal pull was developed and how it's evolved. Then I'll pass over the presentation to Dr. Bonsma-Fisher, and she'll go through our results from 2021 to 2023. Then we'll pass the presentation to Samuel, who will describe how 2024 pedal pull count is going to be executed and how you can get involved. So very briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with Vélo Canada Bikes, we're a national nonprofit organization that is working to build a bicycle-friendly Canada for all people. And we work at the federal level, and we collaborate with all levels of government, industry, academia, and the social sector. And we work to improve access to safe cycling for all people in Canada. We promote the bicycle as a transportation mode of choice. We also gather and disseminate the latest knowledge and trends related to cycling. We also influence policy and funding in cycling in Canada. We educate Canadians about the benefits of access to safe cycling, and we support and amplify cycling advocacy efforts across the country. So what is pedal pull Sondo Vélo? Well, in the simplest terms, it's an annual count of people on bicycles. It's conducted across Canada every year in the first week of June. And as Karen said earlier, it started in 2021, and now we're into our 4th year. And the way in which people count is they use the Counterpoint app, and this app was developed by the Green Action Center, and now it's housed by Winnipeg Trails. And this is a wonderful app that is free to use, and it's a very easy interface for people to then count cyclists as they go by. So this is a really neat schematic that Samuel developed, which describes the pedal pull count as a whole and how it works each year. So first off, every year, Vélo Canada Bikes works to confirm the count locations. And then participants from across the country sign up to count at specific count locations and times using our online sign-up form. And then during pedal pull, in the first week of June, participants who volunteered go out to their count location at their specific count time, and then they use the app to carry out a 2-hour count using the Counterpoint app. And then this data is uploaded to the Counterpoint website, and it starts to build out a growing publicly available data set of cycling in Canada. And then this data can be used for a variety of things. Often it is then downloaded, like we're going to show you today, and analyzed to help advocate for more and better quality cycling infrastructure. And ideally, all of our efforts will lead to more people in Canada living in environments where there's safe and adequate cycling infrastructure so they can choose to go around by bike on a daily basis. So why is pedal pull needed? Well, as many of you know, there's a lack of cycling data in Canada, and this leads to a problem with not knowing who is cycling and where they're cycling. We don't have a good sense of the mode share of all trips. The census measures journey to work, but we all know that there's many other journeys one can take by bike. The lack of data also leads to a problem with an inability to look at trends and longitudinal patterns over time. And there's an issue with then being able to evaluate interventions, like when a city puts in a protected cycling track. And we know that you need data to have evidence-informed policy, and then to evaluate that policy. And you also need data to conduct advocacy efforts, like a lot of us do. And so given this gap, Vélo Canada Bikes set out to create the first national bicycle count. And now I'm going to go through very briefly how pedal pull was developed and how it's evolved. So in 2021, as Karen mentioned earlier, Vélo Canada Bikes partnered with academics across the country, along with bitemaps.org, Winnipeg Trails, and Counterpoint to develop the first pedal pull count. And we were lucky enough to get a small $25,000 grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And we supplemented this with another small grant from Simon Fraser University's Community Engagement Initiative. And then with the addition of hundreds of hours of in-kind and volunteer time from our team, along with thousands of hours of volunteer time from volunteers all across the country, we were able to successfully execute the event. And so in 2021, we worked to develop a new demographic count for Counterpoint. And this count allowed counters to record the perceived gender, perceived age, and perceived ethnic origin of cyclists passing by. And this helped fill an important data gap that was identified at the time. And in 2021, though the count was national, so anyone could take the app and count in any community in the country, we focused our outreach efforts on 14 focus communities to ensure geographic representation in the first count. And the results of 2021 exceeded all of our expectations. We counted almost 80,000 cyclists. There were over 1,000 volunteers that went out to count in 259 locations in 68 communities. And if you'd like to read more about our results in detail, there's a wonderful publication that you can access by scanning this QR code or by looking up Winters et al. In the Journal of Transport and Health, a 2023 publication. So then moving on to 2022, we really wanted to continue on the count. Unfortunately, we weren't able to secure funding. So Vélo Canada Bikes took on the organization of this event unfunded. And because we believe so strongly in the value of this event and the importance of having cycling data in communities all across the country, we expanded it, the pedal pull count, to 30 focus communities. The event was a great success, and Madeleine's going to share some results from 2022 later on in the presentation. And in 2023, we were lucky to get some funding from Infrastructure Canada's Active Transportation Fund. And this allowed us to conduct the 2023 count, and it will allow us to conduct the 2024 count along with analyzing multiple years of data. And in 2023, we decided to shift to a mode share count using the Counterpoint Easy Count. And this allows counters to count the number of cyclists that go by. So it's still comparable to prior years of count, but we also get more information about what other modes of transportation are going on. So the counter counts the number of pedestrians that go by, the number of personal vehicles, and the number of oversized vehicles. And the other really important thing that we did in 2023 was we wanted to make sure that we were setting ourselves up to have a longitudinal data set that could compare the same locations and same times year after year. So we used the exact same count locations and times and communities that we had used in 2022 for 2023. So you can start to see year-over-year trends. And it turned out that a lot of them had also been used in 2021. So we've got some 3 years of data at certain sites. And just before I turn over the presentation to Dr. Bonsma-Fisher, I just want to highlight the importance of all of us going out to count this year so that we can continue to build a robust longitudinal data set of cycling in Canada. So now it is my pleasure to pass over the presentation to Dr. Bonsma-Fisher to go through the data analysis and results with all of you.
Thank you so much, Kate. Hi, everyone. I first encountered pedal pull as a volunteer counter in 2021, and it is a huge pleasure to be involved with the analysis of the 2022 and 2023 data. So I'm going to go through a bit of an overview of how we analyze the data, so highlight some results from 2022 and 2023 overall. And then very excitingly, like Kate talked about, because we now have longitudinal data and counts from the same site in multiple years, we can look at some trends over time at certain locations. We also have data, thanks to Moreno from the Chatter Lab, who's on the call today, about the classification of infrastructure at the sites, which I'll get more into as we get there. And we can compare infrastructure types and counts using that classification. And then I'll come back to, again, the idea of longitudinal data. So to analyze the data, we downloaded the data from the Counterpoint website. So this data is publicly available in its raw form and will be available as well in the more processed form. We cleaned the data to remove things like very short or very long counts or instances where we could find app errors. We also added any paper counts that we had available from 2022 and 2023. So these are cases where people were not able to use the app or encountered issues with the app and submitted their count on paper. Then, because there are occasionally counterpoint locations that there are multiple sites in the app that are close to each other and people counted at sometimes different sites in the same location, we grouped the locations that were within 100 meters of each other to a single ID so that we could compare sites over time if we have data from them. And then, because the amount of time people account for does vary a little bit, perhaps you start your shift at 7:05 when it's actually 7 a.m., to compare counts between different years, we calculated rates, so bikes per hour at each count location and each time window, so that we can then connect the same rates over time at each location. We joined this all with the 2021 data. Moreno from the Chatter Lab in Vancouver classified all the count locations using Google Street View images and using the CanBix infrastructure system, which I'll talk more about later. And then finally, we identified which locations and which count time slots had data from multiple years. So there are, I'll go into more detail with this, but there were 4 weekday time slots available and 1 weekend time slot. And we grouped matching time slots and locations to have year-over-year comparisons. And finally, created summaries for each community and overall for all the results. So here is a lovely list of the communities in 2022 and 2023. It's much longer than the original 14, which is very exciting.
And a QR code to download your results for your locality.
Thanks. Yes, very important. You can see the results now. They're available by checking the QR code. So in 2022, there were almost 50,000 people on bikes counted at 225 sites in 39 communities, and almost 900 hours spent counting by volunteers. So another very successful count year. As a snapshot of the overall results, again, in 2022, people were counting demographic information and perceived demographics. And this is a snapshot of the overall breakdown of age in the results. And in 2023, again, a very successful count year, over 30,000 people on bikes counted at 168 unique locations in 34 communities and over 500 count hours. And what's new in 2023, as Kate mentioned, is that people were also counting other vehicles and pedestrians. So in total, people counted over 350,000 people or vehicles during Pedal Poll 2023. And a snapshot of the overall results from the mode share count in 2023, because people were often counting at locations that also had vehicles, such as roads with bike paths or cycle tracks. We see that there's a huge number of vehicles in yellow and red counted, as well as people walking in blue and people cycling in green. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can learn from having multi-year data, which is very exciting. So like I mentioned before in the analysis section, the important thing was to standardize the counts between years. So let's say you go out to count from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and you start your app at 11:05. We converted your total number of people on bikes counted to a rate per hour. So that allows us to compare year over year. And what these plots are showing, I'm focusing on just one community here in Ottawa, but you can look for your community again by going to the results. Each dot is a single volunteer's count, each colored dot, and then the lines connect counts that happened at the same location and in the same time slot between different years. So there are some locations that have counts in 2 of the 3 years, and some locations that have counts in all 3 years, and this is showing all of the counts that had some overlap between years. So anything that was counted only once is not shown here, but this again shows how important it is to go back and count in the same places so that we can compare year over year. And on the y-axis again is the bikes per hour rate. So in most of the things I'm showing, that's the value on the vertical y-axis is bikes per hour. And very excitingly, we can take all of the sites together that were counted in all 3 years, of which there were 74, and we can calculate the average bikes per hour across all of these sites across the whole country. And what we see is that on the whole, the rates are going up over time, which is very exciting. That's great news for cycling in Canada. Whether we look at the weekday counts or the weekend time slots, they're always going up. So now I'm going to talk about classifying the infrastructure present at the count sites and what we can learn from that. So again, this classification was done by Moreno, who looked at so many Google Street View images. Thank you, Moreno. And CAN-BIC stands for the Canadian Bikeway Comfort and Safety Classification System. So this is a standardized metric that applies to infrastructure across the country, meant to kind of overcome the fact that different communities call these things different names. So for example, in the top row, the high comfort category, there are 3 different types of infrastructure in this classification: local street bikeways, cycle tracks, or bike paths. And something like a local street bikeway might be called something like a greenway in your community, or a quiet street, or a woonerf. There are many different names. So this classification was developed to have a standard for the whole country. And that's what we've used to classify, where possible, the infrastructure at each count site for pedal pull. Medium comfort is a multi-use path, and this might be surprising that it's not high comfort, but this is because there's pedestrians and people on bikes mixing, and that's not always the safest design. And finally, the low comfort classification is basically anything that's not protected. So a painted bike lane is the infrastructure type here. I'm showing now results from the 2021 pedal poll just to orient us to how this data looks. So again, on the vertical y-axis, this is the rate of cyclists per hour, people on bikes per hour. And these plots are box plots that give a sense of the distribution of counts as well. But the important thing to compare between these is the horizontal black line, which is the median in each category. And these are arranged with the high comfort 3 groups on the left, so bike path, local street bikeway, cycle track. Then the multi-use path, which is medium comfort. And finally, painted bike lanes are low comfort. And then the other 2 categories, which are other infrastructure or no cycling infrastructure, either they don't conform to any of these categories, or there is no infrastructure at all. And it's very clear that there are higher rates of people biking on the high comfort facilities. So that's what we saw in 2021. And now we can calculate the same thing for 2022 and 2023. So the plot on the right, we'll start here, is the same data format as the 2021 data. So the high comfort facilities are on the left, the medium comfort multi-use path is in the middle, painted bike lanes, and then the unclassified or no infrastructure. And on the left plot, I'm grouping these by the comfort class. So high comfort, medium, or low comfort. And also in 2021, we see the same thing, that the rates of people biking per hour are higher on these high comfort facilities. And this was again true in 2023. It's a little harder to see because of these 2 data points that with a really high rate of bikes per hour, but the high comfort facilities are still seeing overall higher rates of people biking. And what's cool with the 2023 data is now we can also look at mode share as it relates to infrastructure type. So these plots, again, we're still looking at the rates over time, but now I'm comparing the fraction of people biking, pedestrians, vehicles or oversized vehicles. And then each bar on the x-axis is an infrastructure type that might be an on-road facility. So cycle track and local street bikeway are both high comfort facilities. Painted bike lane is a low comfort, and the final category is no infrastructure. And we can see here also that the 2 high comfort categories have a higher share of cyclists. So the green bar is bigger in each of those ones. And this is great because many of us are focused on how we can create safe cycling infrastructure. And this result really shows that where that infrastructure exists and is high comfort, the share of people biking compared to other modes is higher, which is very exciting. And so I hope that this has given you some taste of the power of the longitudinal data that we're now having, that we can see these trends over time at different sites, we can see that across the whole country, comparing the same sites and same time slots, we can see that people are cycling more and more over time, which is great. We also have the ability to do natural experiments or look at natural experiments that happen. So for instance, if new infrastructure is added or an infrastructure change is made, and we have data from over time at the same site, we can compare rates of cycling before and after. We can also look at things like the impact of weather. So as many of you know, in 2023, there was a lot of wildfire smoke during the week of the count. I counted in Toronto on a very smoky day. And so we're interested in also looking at the impact of that event on counts at different sites. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave it, and I'll turn it over to Samuel.
Thanks, guys. So now I'm going to let you guys know about how you can engage in the 2024 count, which is of course happening, and some other things that I think will be of interest to you that we're working on. Next. Yeah, so here's a QR code. So there's a sign up list, a sign up form that's live right now to participate in Pedal Poll 2024. It's going to be happening on a weekday in your community and a weekend day in your community, and we're going to confirm those depending on weather. We're looking for a fair weather weekday and a fair weather weekend day, and it's going to be between June 4th and 9th. It's always the first full week of June. And again, the locations are, for the most part, they're selected by local advocates, but if there's one that's not available to you in your community, participants can go out and, choose a location of interest. But our focus this year is to focus in on sites that have some longitudinal data already, and to make sure we get that fourth year. So we don't want to spread our resources too thin. And next, another thing that a number of people have helped us out with, including a bunch of people who are on this call, is they went out and did a count. They did a count this spring, and we're still looking for people to help do that, because the Counterpoint is an amazing app that it's one of a kind, and it's basically like an indie app done by somebody in Winnipeg who is passionate about active transportation. And when our phones operating systems keep getting updated, sometimes features of the app can break down for certain users. So we're looking for people to do like a 40-minute count in their community and provide us feedback on what the experience was like, and let us know if there are any bugs in the experience that we can then work with the developer to, or iron out any outstanding bugs before the big event in June. Next, the next thing we want to highlight. So Kate, telling us the history of Pedal Poll, let us know about the history of funding. There was some startup funding in 2021, 2022. There was no funding, and that was a challenge. 2023 and 2024, thankfully, through the Active Transportation Fund, which we helped advocate for, this project is funded, and we were able to bring Madeleine on to do this amazing analysis. But you'll note 2025 and 2026, there are question marks. At this point, it is a completely unfunded program for the project for the next 2 years. And there's 49 people here on this call. I think we're all interested in continuing this project and building up our this data set. So we're hoping that among you, there might be some people who would be interested in working with us, perhaps applying for research grants with us. Perhaps you're at an academic institution and you'd be interested in building this out. And we do have some ideas on how we can build out extra features to make the project even better in future years. And the next thing there's some other opportunities to engage with Vélo Canada Bikes. I'll just highlight 3 right now. Every month we host a call on, I think it's the 3rd Friday afternoon of the month, and it's a 1-hour call where we bring in bike advocates from across the country. Most of them are members of our coalition, and we start off with a 30-minute presentation from one of our members, giving really practical, on-the-ground presentations on something that they're doing in their own communities, and offering it freely to the rest of the bike advocacy community across the country to build on. And we've just had a few on winter cycling, And the one I just confirmed, the one coming up next week, I think, is from the community bike shop in Peterborough, because a lot of the friends who've been on this call have been talking about the issue of building sustainable funding systems for community bike shops. And so we're having one of our members share their experience on that. Another thing we've been working on next is our newsletter. We have an excellent newsletter that comes out every month, and we've been gathering, the latest events of national scope and research tools, updates on our advocacy work, and it's been getting really great feedback, and I'd love to have you join that newsletter. And the other thing, the next one is we're a membership-based organization, and I want to acknowledge actually a bunch of members who are here. There's Jane from Cycling Without Age, Allison from Cycle Toronto, Jenny from Hub Cycling, Pearl from the Alberta Cycling Coalition, Cassie from EnviroCenter, and I'm sure many others. And these are the organizations that we're representing in our advocacy work here in Ottawa to unlock more federal funding and from the federal government to build out cycling infrastructure across Canada. And we would love to have more of you join our coalition. It's not just cycling advocacy organizations. Some of them are environmental organization, academics, businesses. I also want to acknowledge Tim Hadfield is from Shimano, one of our supporting partners, is here as well. So please do take a look at our membership page. And that's it for me. So I'm gonna put in the chat a bunch of links to these other opportunities to engage, as well as the sign up sheets for the testing and to sign up for Pedal Pool 2024.
Thank you. And thank you to all three speakers. So I see there's a number of questions in the chat, but I'm going to start things off, and please feel free to put more questions in for our speakers. So I think my first question is going to be for Kate. Can you share how important it's been to have pedal pool data for the advocacy work of Vélo Canada Bikes, and how you see that going forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So yeah, as I alluded to in my presentation, you really need data and proof, to support the case for any sort of policy change typically. And it also helps prevent, sadly, situations where infrastructure is potentially threatened to be removed after it's already there, let alone making the case to put it in place. And so, the way that we were able to be successful with, building the case for why we needed the federal active transportation fund, right, to fund cycling infrastructure across the country was because we had data to support that, right? And then when smaller municipalities, it could be or a large urban center or maybe a rural area that wants to build, infrastructure, you really to have data to show what the current state is. You could then model what the future state could be. You can assess an intervention. It's just so essential. So that's why I'm so passionate about this project. And it's very low cost on the scheme of things, right? So it doesn't involve a municipality having to invest in very expensive equipment. All you need to do is mobilize your community members and use the free app, and we'll support you, to do that count. And then you have data to really do what you want with. So that's why I'm so passionate about this project.
And another thing, another one of the special things that this program offers is that it's unlike, that we know that like the expensive equipment is really powerful, and it's great when municipalities can afford it. But this is able to be deployed in multiple locations that, that our advocacy members identify. Often we also work with municipalities to identify some of the locations, and it engages people in going out and doing the observation. And we keep hearing from participants what an eye-opening experience it is to just sit down for a couple of hours and observe how the infrastructure is being used. And it surprises even those of us who are very keen watchers of these things.
Yeah, I totally have found that it's, yeah, watching people bike and counting them, it's amazing. Madeleine, is there some other data you can see that would be useful to collect in future pedal pull counts?
Yeah, something that we're talking about is if we can get counters to also classify the infrastructure as they're counting, because right now we're relying on Street View images, which are maybe
Right.
not matched to the specific date of the count and things like that.
And do you have a few locations where even over the course of the last couple of years, it's changed? It's gone from, say, low comfort painted bike lane to a cycle track?
That is the next thing I'm going to try because it's been a bit slow. I had a baby in January. But
Yeah,
yes, there's still TBD. We definitely want to check that.
Okay. I think there's a couple of good, there's some questions in the chat, so I'll pull one up. So Christina is asking, it's hard to interpret mode share data when some locations have no motorized traffic and so would contribute to a negative bias in aggregate data. For example, Waterloo shows 1.6% personal vehicles and 0.2% oversized vehicles. How do you adjust for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I completely agree. Comparing the overall mode share between now that we have the classification with the infrastructure type, what we're going to do next is look at how mode share compares across the same class of infrastructure type between communities. So that's a comparison that we can kind of standardize for the fact that, yeah, in somewhere like Waterloo, people were counting mostly on trails where there aren't going to be any vehicles.
Right.
And if I can just add into those who maybe in water, the people who are counting on trails and thinking, okay, what the, I was doing the demographic count here, and then, what is the, now we're doing something different. We would still say that, as you saw, there's various analyses we're doing with the data, right? And one of the most important things, right, is that longitudinal count of cyclists, right? And so your time is not wasted, right, counting just because we're switching up the different counts to get some data to use and, round out the data. You're still getting year after year cycling data, and that can really show, where the trends are going. So don't despair. And Madeleine's a genius with the analysis. So we'll account for those other questions that you guys had asked about.
There's a question here on the Q&A from Ken. And saying regarding the slide of user numbers versus cycling facility type, how to interpret the apparently larger number of diamonds on the multi-use paths? What does each diamond represent?
I think Kate can go back to one of those plots. Yeah, so the diamonds are, go forward maybe to the new one. Yeah, so the plot, the horizontal black line in the middle is the median, and then the box shows the 25% and 75% of the data cutoff. And then the whisker is the rest of the distribution, and then the diamonds are what the algorithm considers an outlier. That's kind of just mapping this to a distribution. So the diamonds would be individual counts that have been converted to bikes per hour. And the question was, why are there more diamonds? Yeah, so that just means that the distribution had a different shape where there's kind of what we would call like a long tail, where there's a few counts that are high, most of them are a bit lower. I hope that answers the question.
That's great. And then Molly is asking whether this year's count will be mode share again as in 2023.
Yes, it's going to be mode share. Yeah, the same.
And two questions from Zvi. Given that it can be challenging enough just counting cyclists, especially when there are dozens or even hundreds per hour, is it wise to dilute our efforts and add in vehicles? Ooh.
That's a good question. It's something that it can be used to illustrate a few different things. And one thing that we recommend for some people is that if you're on a busy roadway, that to indicate in your counterpoint that you're doing it may be only one direction of traffic if it's too much for you to capture both directions. But it's I've seen on Twitter sometimes during the event folks sending a screenshot of their count, and asking, where is the war on cars, when they're, illustrating, the scale of car dependency on some of our roadways. So that's one of the, that's one of the observations that can be made, or that, and to illustrate how mode share shifts when safe connected cycling infrastructure is added, and potentially illustrate a shift away from private motor vehicles towards active transportation.
And I'll just add a bit, and then I think Madeleine might be able to jump even better understanding this. But, if you look at typically in the situations where I think that Zvi's alluding to, you just got, cars are just whizzing by, right? And you potentially also have bikes whizzing by if you've got, really great infrastructure, or maybe there's just a few bikes. So in the case where you only have a few bikes, obviously the most important thing is to get every single bike that went by, right? And if you miss a few cars, your numbers are going to be relatively still very accurate, right? But if you are in a situation where you're just getting sensory overload because you have tons of cars, tons of bikes, then what Samuel was alluding to is that you pick one side of the road and only count one direction of all modes. And then ideally, if you have a friend, they can do the other side of the street. And then you can capture it. But as long as you note that, we can then account for that in the analysis. So the most important thing is to count your bikes. And if you miss a few cars, because honestly, your thousands are going by, it is what it is. Just make a note.
Another follow-up question from Zvi is, any thoughts about integrating the type of bike into the analysis? For example, bike share is very popular here in Montreal, and it would be useful to have some statistics on the relative percentage of the total ridership mix. E-bikes too. I know here in Victoria, it's, sometimes on the regional trails, it's probably more than half. So just wondering if there's plans to try to count the different types.
Absolutely, pending funding. So if there's any lovely individual on this call who wants to co-write a grant with us, or potentially a company who wants to, give us some money, we can talk numbers. We would love to do that. It's absolutely in the planning. It's just pending funding. Because it would involve having to do a whole new count development, which of course is a app development process, testing, whatnot, and then of course the funding to then execute it. So it's not, it's not impossible. We just need the funding, and we would love to do it. So yes.
That's great. Samuel, what would you say to anyone who is interested in counted but might feel a little, a little nervous, like this seems overwhelming? Well, do you do it properly? Like, what kind of help or training or assistance can be for the new counter?
That's a good question. It's we provide, once people sign up, we provide them with all the resources they need, including a manual where it has a lot of clear headings, and we're constantly refining it to make it as clear as possible. But we encourage everybody to try it, and to try to use the app as well, because it's very powerful. And I also, some folks have asked about like the full data set, if it's open, and it is open, and I put a link in the chat. I'll put it again right now, that it's so through the Counterpoint website, you can access this colossal data set that you can refine, but it's not analyzed. So what Madeleine has done for all of us is draw out the counts that were done during those dates that were participating in this specific event, and then analyze them, so we can make meaning out of it. But you can access everything in this in that database, and you can also see people using it across the earth at all times, which is pretty impressive.
And Samuel, the clean data is also available. Is that right?
In the link that we've been sharing, yeah.
Okay.
Your clean. That's right. In the other one, why don't you could jump back to that slide, Kate, to the to where the results are available. Yeah. So that's the. So it's
remind me where
it's the one with all the cities named.
Oh yeah, that one. Sorry. I'm like, wait, which QR code? We have so many. Hold on. Going back. Hold on a second.
So that one is.
There we go. There's your QR code.
And that link will bring you to a Google folder that has a list of every city, and in every city there's a number of files available that are also very shareable, and we encourage you to share them widely, and some cleaned data that had, you know, like the full data for a community, but that Madeleine has cleaned up.
And if I can just jump in and add one more thing related to the earlier question, just about people who would be, you know, a little nervous about this, what I recommend, and I was nervous too the first year because I'm someone who, you know, don't want to make a mistake, want to have the good data, is that you go out ahead of time and practice the count. And that also helps us identify any, you know, issues with the app, right? Because as Samuel said, you know, if there's an update, that's why we've constantly got people testing ahead of time. And we know last year there may be some disappointed people on the call. There was an exceptional amount of app issues, but this year, don't worry. We've been testing well in advance, and there's been nothing major identified, and anything has been fixed. So as long as we keep having people test, that helps the app quality. But those who are nervous, it also helps with practice, right? So you get used to your count location. You go out, you learn how you're setting up the app, how you're counting, how you submit it. That's what we really recommend. And then, of course, Samuel said there's all those resources which will help you get to that point, and then you can practice before the week of the event.
I see there's a few questions in the chat, and one of which is from Marcel, and he's asked, how are people on e-scooters, skateboards, etc. counted? And just a clarification, how e-scooters are counted if there are people on bikes?
Do you want me to take that? Who do you want? Madeleine?
Yeah, I can answer that. So like a scooter that is like kick style that you like stand on, like Lime or something like that, would be counted as a pedestrian. And I think that is indicated in the graphic.
So even if it's
Yeah.
even if there's regardless of whether there's a motor or not.
Yes. So there are some motorized devices that would be counted as pedestrians, like a Segway or an e-scooter.
Sorry, I'm not sure if there's a graphic here, Madeleine. I don't think it should go to. But...
Yeah, sorry, in the mode share one, you were right.
Going
There's
here?
no text. There's a lot of text, but foot, wheelchair, stroller, rollerblade, skateboard, kick, scooter, other personal mobility devices, people walking. So it's kind of just like there are so many types, but they're all kind of, yeah. And Samuel's showing in the app, you can kind of get a hint of which one to click for which type of
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is tricky, and there has been some feedback around how that's broken down, but you know, there's an ease in having 4 buttons, and it would definitely be, you know, in a future year with some funding, it would be great to we could potentially, you know, reevaluate, add some more features, but it's really important that it's really easy and seamless for the users.
Okay, yeah, the chat's been quite busy. So
There's a question earlier in the chat that I can answer from Leonard about smoke.
Okay.
So Leonard's question is, in Mississauga, we also had a very bad air quality week due to forest fire smoke. Our count numbers were down. Do you make allowances in your data analysis for this, or weather impact on counts? So we have not adjusted for anything like that yet. Like Samuel mentioned, we're mostly aiming for a good weather day for the count, but I counted on a smoky day. A lot of people did. Some people waited till the next week. So we know that there is kind of the split in the data. And one of the things we're going to look at is if we can identify, based on air quality data, if there was an impact on the counts because of that. So we plan to look at this in further analysis.
Yeah, hopefully that won't be a problem this summer. Fingers
crossed. And just to add, for this year, we'll have more details about this, but we'll have, you know, obviously we didn't predict what was, you know, going to go on, but now that we know that sadly there may be a repeat, let's hope not, but there may be, that we'll have more clear plans on what you do. So, you know, potentially a more official shifting to the next week so that we can have more days of clear counting for people. But more to come on that. But we're aware that that could be a major issue.
Okay, and there's another question in the Q&A. It says the data and reports are publicly available, correct, as opposed to member only available? And then, oh yeah, we've already answered the e-scooters and skateboards, but just to clarify that the data and reports are publicly available.
Yeah, and we'd love to have it, you know, distributed as widely as possible. Yeah, our membership is really, you know, our members are people who are, you know, the individuals and groups that are supporting our mission, but we don't really work in terms of like having you know, those sorts of paywalls.
Okay, well, if there's not any additional questions, do you have one last plug, Samuel, as to where you really need help coming in the next 2 months as we approach the 2024 pedal pull?
Well, individuals on this call could really help by helping with recruitment. So there's going to be, join our newsletter, check us out on social media, also your local cycling advocacy organization, maybe you're running it. But volunteer recruitment is a huge piece of it. And we absolutely, we don't do it alone. We don't have the reach. It's through our partners across Canada that the recruitment happens. And also, we'd love to have more testing of the app and distribution. So yeah, those are the three things, more things. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, don't delete all my emails. Read them.
Okay, so that concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining us. And we invite you to check out our CapaCITY website and sign up for our newsletter. Thank you again to our speakers, to Kate, to Madeleine, and to Samuel for joining us today. And yeah, and reach out to us or to Vélo Canada Bikes if you'd like more information on anything that's been discussed today.